is a shout out just for you. You support me, so I support you. This show is for our friend Paralife TV, your everyday wheelchair ninja, and I can read. Since 23 years ago, I suffered a T12 incomplete spinal injury. He's had great support with his family, friends, and community, which is great. Prior to the pandemic, he did a lot of speaking. Of course, after the pandemic, not really a thing, although maybe he'll get back into that now that things are starting to settle down. Very interesting channel. My first disabled, maybe the right word? I want to say handicapped, it always sounds bad, and I know that's a technical term. Channel, very interesting, very inspirational. He did a few tours, so those of you who like to see new places, check him out. Like, share, comment, let him know we sent you by. Alright, tell us something interesting.
Well, today's little history lesson, we're actually going to do this a little backwards. We're going to start with the present and work our way back.
That's not how history works.
I know, but
alright then.
At least that way we have a ground base to work with, because Hardin County right now, as we talk about,
live and breathe,
is 1,311 people. It's not that big. It's the third least populous county in all of South Dakota.
Woohoo!
If I remember right by the numbers, it's averages out to be about 2 square miles per man, woman, and child for the entire county. Pretty big. Now, the county itself
I was making food. Andrew, don't grab the microwave so it doesn't beep again, please.
Is way up in the northwestern corner of the state.
Thank you.
Originally named for one of the Dakota Territory Speakers of the House, J.A. Harding, and was originally created in 1881. Now, the big thing with this corner of the state is there is not a lot of major roads up there. I mean, there's Highway 85, there's Highway 79, a couple that cut across, from Buffalo east to west, going out by Camp Crook. The big thing is, though, there's a couple of spots where there's the Custer National Forest, you've got the Slim Buttes area, but for the most part is that it's gently rolling hills. There's a lot of rangeland for cattle, horses, stuff like that. And back in 1881, this is before the state was even officially carved into existence. In 1883, 1889, and then 1894, Harding itself actually would wind up having its boundaries altered, and eventually Hardin County was completely dissolved. The territory was assigned to Butte County, the county to the south of it, and they also took the county of Perkins to the east and made one great big Butte County. Well, this lasted until about 1908, and then they rebuilt Hardin County, and about 1908 was about the same time that some real creative people came up with a way to make a county seat. They took the Hardin County as a map, and they went from corner to corner, drew a line, corner to corner, drew a line, and they built a town right in the middle. Now, the people who were looking at the map at the time said, well, this will actually work out pretty good, because then anybody that has to do business with the county seat, it's the shortest distance in the middle, which, kind of makes sense. There were 4 families in this particular neck of the woods, close to the Grand River, who actually were quite instrumental. They were able to build a hotel, they were able to build a general store, a newspaper shop, several other businesses, all in this little area in a quick round of succession in about a couple months. Interestingly enough, about the time that they started getting these things all built up and set up, there was a question on where they wanted to put the county seat. And so Buffalo put out its bid. Now, they had one competition. Off to the west, Camp Crook was already established. Camp Crook was established back in 1881. And they wanted to be, county seat. Well, the big difference came into, again, location. Camp Crook sits about 3 miles away from Montana, so it's literally right there. And Buffalo started out with a pretty good offer, 40 acres, 5 rooms on the second floor of where their big general store was, while Camp Crook came out with their offer of, again, 40 acres, $2,600 in cash, or they could get 6 rooms on top of one of their general stores out there, plus a vault in a cement building to protect the county records, and a policy of about 2 years free rental off of the property. Eventually things came to a vote, and Buffalo won the election. And then the following year is when Harding County was allowed to successfully become its own county away from Butte, and Perkins made its own run. Now, when all this stuff happened, there was about 12 different towns that were able to effectively break from Butte County. Some of them, to this day, we know well: Buffalo, Camp Crook, Ladner, Ludlow, Ralph, Riva, Gustav, and the town of Harding, which at one time was known as Nashville. Now, when originally they had plotted out Harding County, like a lot of the parts of South Dakota, they were bringing in, farmers to try to settle in places, grow crops. Some people went right into ranching, raising cattle. A lot of it would depend on where they were located within the county. Harding County, actually, to its credit, didn't have the problem that they did south of Riva. Riva is almost on the county line with Butte. South of Riva, you run into what we call the gumbo. Well, the upper areas above the gumbo, it almost would remind you of what the Badlands look like. There was a lot of alkali water. There were streams, but you wouldn't dare, drink from them. So a lot of wells had to be punched into the topsoil. Different places would try to, grow hay. We've seen them on some of our runs. They also had some interesting places that they would set up towns. And, nowadays you can go out and you can see ruins of some of the places. One of the places that was mentioned in the historical book I was reading was a town called Vesey.
We've been there.
We've been there. Vesey, interestingly enough, had 2 schools. They had one that was called the Thorpe School, and it was the first original school that they had. And then they built a second one, the Vesey School, about a mile south. They also had a church. They had a regular hall, like Grindstone did. They had several houses, a general store, a post office. And then, interestingly enough, the post office, from what it was looking like, they wound up moving that to Haley, north of the border. Haley and Vesey were maybe 2 miles apart. They're very close.
Very close.
And then, of course, there was also the Hillsborough School that we saw. Interestingly enough, the Hillsborough Township had 3 schools. They took 2 of the schools when the class sizes dropped, and they connected the schools back to back. And that's the school that we now see today that's being used as kind of like a hunting shack up there. There's other townships that, they had people that would settle in places, The big problem that some of these places would have is that, well, A, they're so far away from any major town center. A good example there was that there used to be a place up north called Pennville. Near Pennville, there were two churches, and they're both on the historic register. One is the Peace Valley Lutheran Church,
which we've been to.
And its cemetery. We also found out recently that there's a second cemetery up in that neck of the woods that we got to go investigate. But the big problem that they had up there is that there is virtually, no major towns in that area. They had another township up there called Twin, but to this day there is nothing except the occasional farmhouse up there. Vesey, irony, has a loop that circles back and around and comes back and goes back around, and a lot of it again is farmhouses and settlements that have all been kind of linked together, but there isn't really any town per se. A good example, Ludlow, in the most recent census, stated a population of 3. However, if you would happen to go through like we did on a Sunday, and there's about 75 people there, you can tell where all the people are. They don't live in town. They live on the ranches that surround the place.
And there isn't much for businesses or facilities or anything else.
But we did see when we were at Ludlow, there is a church, there is a cemetery, there is a school. I don't think the post office is running there anymore. I would have to double check that. And they also have their, go ahead and put the dots down. You have a tavern, a general store, a restaurant, and a gas station all in one building. Kind of like Gustav was. Now, the other interesting part that I have seen with Harding, and this kind of seems to be the growing trend, with Harding County, any of your major, call them major towns, is that is how these places have managed to survive and operate. Reva's major function town part is a general store with a gas station. That way you could get your supplies, your food, medical goods, gas, and that way you don't have to go 25 miles down to Buffalo,
but you have very limited choices.
Right, they are limited to that point. Or 35 miles down the road the other way to Bison. But Reva's like that. For a time there, I was reading Ralph used to be in a similar boat. Ralph's problem is the same problem that when I was looking at the census numbers, Harding County, as I was showing, has actually been shrinking.
Oh no, shrinkage.
Going down through the numbers for the demographics, back in 1910, Harding County was over 4,000 people.
Woo!
Every year, except for the 1960s, they showed a negative increase in population. In fact, this last year, in 2020, they actually increased by 4.5%. So they gained almost, little over 50 plus people. They are estimating a 1.2% increase for 2021 as well, depending on the numbers that they're working with. The big thing also is that, there's the age issue. I was reading one of the statistics that they were showing. The biggest problem that they have is that almost 15% of the households are a single person 65 years of age or older, which means that's the last generation. When
then
those
there'll be
people,
no more.
when they pass on, or
there's nothing to hold them there.
Yeah, when the kids come and say, "Hey, Mom and Dad, we're moving you from Faith," or "Mom and Dad, we're moving you from Lemon," that's a generation that's no longer going to be out there. they have some of these farms that I was looking at on the map, some of these rangelands that are over 40,000 acres. And the thing is that, when they originally were setting up, let's take Vesey for example. Vesey at one time may have been anywhere between 40 to 80 families, all in one area. Everybody had a house. Some of them had, your traditional squatters' residences. Eventually they would build their own houses. But then as, weather conditions worsened, the Dust Bowl came through in the 1930s. In 1914 to 1918, you had the Spanish flu. Some places, I read about this in a few different stories for the families, people would move here, they would stay here for 5 to 7 years, then they'd move back to Iowa, they'd move over to Minnesota, they'd move up to North Dakota.
We're hard on people.
Yeah, there was one guy that was crazy enough, he actually broke his back and laid in bed for about 3 months, and then the guy got up and walked to Montana to get checked out by a physician. The hospital was like, "You walked here from South Dakota? Why?" He says, "I didn't have a horse."
Not that you could have been able to ride it with a back broken back,
yeah. And of course, this was all after he had gone to North Dakota and seen another doctor who told him, "Oh, your back isn't broken.
It's fine."
Good medical, archaic medical technology back then in the 1910s, 1920s. A couple of the other fun features that they had for Harding County was the churches. Churches and the schools both were big in Harding County. Just about every little township, would have a school. At one time, there were over 65 schools in Harding County, which is kind of amazing to think because now there's maybe 5 towns. 65 schools, all single room, scattered all over the county. And then when they started discovering that, their budget wasn't exactly going to work very well for this process, they started, consolidating. Kids started getting bused to distances. The only high school that they had was in Buffalo. But, they had schools in Ralph, in Camp Crook, in Riva, in Ludlow. They still got a school there. Riva's school is still there. Reading is down to about 4 buildings. But some of these other towns, once the schools and stuff like that folded up, the towns just pretty much, like we were saying, is that generation came and passed. There is nothing left of the town up by Pennville. The 2 churches that we talked about are still there, though, and the cemeteries that are next to them. There was one place that had quite an interesting storyline on it, and I'm hoping that we can take a drive up there. There was a town that was called Gobert, and Gobert was at the intersection of 2 creeks up by the Moreau River, and it was originally founded by this one guy whose first name was Gobert, and his family moved up there, a total of 5 of them. And he built the first general store, and then they lived there almost 15 years, and then he got employed and sold the shop. He was employed down in Newell. Well, the guy who bought the place tried to run it. There was some speculation that he went crazy after about 5 to 10 years. And then he came back up and was able to buy the store back again. But then, by that time, all that was left pretty much of the town, infrastructure, the post office was still there. The store was barely hanging on. And a lot of the families, they eventually moved to places where there were more people. Eventually, the last action that I guess he had was that he wound up closing the store and tearing it down and using some of the lumber to improve the business back up a Newell. Kind of an interesting way to do business. But in other places, when we were talking about religion, they mentioned that some of these churches that they've had, you had both your Catholic churches, and it was kind of crazy because there were some of these bishops and stuff that were holding services. They would have a circuit of maybe 8 different churches that they would have to go to.
Never mind, so we have to go back and do that. What is it, Hillmo?
Yeah, Hillmo. And the one poor guy, he was doing this for 50 years. The sad part is, by the time he was done, he was blind. Because when you were out on the prairie trying to do those, circuits on horseback with the high winds and the cold weather, it destroyed his vision. He couldn't see anymore. He was replaced. He wound up spending the last years of his life down in San Antonio, Texas, in retirement. And then, of course, with the population starting to dwindle and the economics of, not having enough income for these churches, some of the churches got consolidated. Other churches just outright were closed. There was a church in Struhl, which wound up getting merged with a church called St. Julia up by Ralph, and it became St. Isidore off of Ludlow Road. And then the church up by Vesey was merged with the Hall, and it became Our Lady of the Prairie down south. And of course, nowadays for Vesey, the cemetery is still there. We've been there. We videotaped it. The school and the teacher's residence is still there. And again, like I was saying, is there are some houses up there. Now, whether those are just, summer homes for people, you go all the way up to Halley, up in North Dakota, and I would say there's maybe 10 to 12 houses. But it's a question on if they're just summer homes or if people actually live there year-round. The story is that Halley has a population of 2.
2.
Which means the cemetery got more people than the town actual.
Yes.
But one of the last things that I did read that was kind of interesting is that when they talk about how you can tell where people still live, I looked up the voting records for Harding County. The most recent records had people voting in Ralph, Riva, Ludlow, Camp Crook, and there are 4 locations in Buffalo. Now, whether that means there's just not enough people to warrant setting a station up in down at Reading, or the people from Reading have to drive 20 miles to do their voting, we don't know. But some of these other towns also, Reading is a good example. Sometimes towns move. I was reading that Reading, the town itself, is actually 2 miles from where the original town was. They, when they realigned Highway 85 from Belle Fourche, they turned and pivoted and moved it over so that it would be right next to that road. The cemetery, Wakeman Cemetery, is still there and still highly populated by cacti. Cactus.
My friends.
But, there's also, there is a lot of history back up in that area. If you use the old Camp Crook Road, the old city road, you go up by Gustav. The church is still standing up there, the St. John's Catholic Church. From what I was understanding is, it even still had its insurance up to date into 1987. It was still being paid. There's a couple houses for a family named Blake that's on the National Historic Register across the road. I think their school at Gustav is still standing on that side too. And I looked at the map and it looks like the road to that church is still open. So if we decide to make a journey up that way, might have to go take a look at that church. There is still the church at Camp Crook to go check out. And then we saw a listing for a school called Craze, which is on the road to Montana, which Sue would like to go check out. But then the thing that always made it kind of interesting is, while they wanted to center the county seat in Buffalo, a lot of small towns kind of paid for it, because at one time the town of Harding used to be huge. I mean, to this day, when you drive through there, you can see where there was a tire store, a general store, the school, the church, the firehouse, several houses. To this day, there's only about 12 people left. And of course, there are great big cemeteries back there too. Up in the northwestern quadrant of the county, there was a place called Cox that had both a regular church and a Catholic church, and the cemetery is still in existence up there. I guess the Catholic church is still standing. It was the Protestant one that burned down.
Wow.
Because I was looking at that on the satellite view as well. But up in that neck of the woods, there was a town called Carian that we drove right through, apparently. Ladner. We saw the cemetery there, and both the old and new churches. They just recently decided that they were going to close the old church and construct a new one in the 70s. Nice looking building. I mean, granted, it looks like an oversized trailer.
Yeah.
Stacked on top of each other. Sorry, guys. But then if you take that back road all the way down to the one road that goes over to Buffalo, there used to be a town called Alva. Bullock is over there. And then, of course, if you go north from Crook, you also have what used to be called Ashforth. And from what I was understanding, there was a cemetery on the western side of the Little Missouri River. So that might be another one to go look at on our satellite views. But, as populations go, the two other factors that Harding is constantly going to be fighting against. Technology, you don't need that many people anymore if you're, dealing with, hay cuttings. There's a lot of machinery that has made it, you don't need a huge staff anymore to run a farm. And so there's that advantage. And the big thing is that, what me and Sue discussed before, is there isn't a lot of appeal, for people to come out here. The best example I can think of, there was a guy here in South Dakota that struck it rich. He won one of the Powerballs, and he used to live down by Mission. And I still don't know how they figured the budget out on this, but it's crazy. He won something like $200 million. Well, he decided that, being, living on a ranch all his life with his folks, he was going to build his own ranch. And so he went down by Vail, and he started buying up small ranches. Well, he got to something about the size of 400,000 acres down by the Bismarck Trail, and he's put it up for sale. Turns out that he's been spending more and more time with his girlfriend, who lives up in Vancouver, or down by the southwest of the United States, and he just doesn't have time anymore for the ranch up here. And so again, you could have a great big ranch, but if there's nothing to really tie you to the area, we're going to constantly see people, pack up, move away. And eventually these people, it's going to be an industry that we're going to wind up losing. And so I'm hoping they find a way to, find something to lure these people back. Maybe make a contract for deed with their college loans or something, or start increasing the educational field to start sponsoring jobs out here. There's got to be some way to keep these jobs coming. I mean, we still get labor that comes up from Mexico. Some of the Canadians will come down to do sharecropping and stuff like that. But as far as our general work around here, working with cattle, working some of these farms, eventually we've got to find a happy meet, or we might all get replaced by robots, which is a scary thought. But this has been Joe for the Mud Files. If you have any other suggestions, give us a tab, and for the Mud Files, you have a good one.